I never thought my hobby of grooming cross-country ski trails would land me in the middle of a war with my homeowners association. But here I was, staring at a $500 fine notice taped to my front door. The morning air in Stowe, Vermont was crisp and cold, the kind of February morning that made your lungs burn in the best way possible. I had been up since 4:30, same as always, running my snowmobile and trail groomer across the vast network of trails that wound through our mountain community. My name is Lucas Jamison, and for the past 8 years, I had been maintaining these trails purely out of love for the sport and community spirit. The notice fluttered in the wind as I yanked it off my door. The paper was official HOA letterhead, signed by Patricia Hendricks, the president of the Mountainside Estates Homeowners Association. I read through it twice, my coffee growing cold in my other hand. Violation of community quiet hours, Section 4.2b. Operation of loud machinery between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Fine, $500. Continued violations will result in additional fines of $1,000 per occurrence. I stood there in disbelief. 8 years. For 8 years, I had been grooming these trails every other morning during ski season, maintaining over 15 miles of pristine cross-country ski tracks. The entire community used them. Families, retirees, the local ski club, even Patricia herself. I had seen her out there just last week with her designer ski outfit and matching poles. My phone rang. It was my neighbor, Tom Richardson. "Lucas, did you get one too?" he asked. "Get what?" "A fine." Patricia slapped me with a $300 noise violation for running my snowblower at 6 in the morning, said I was disturbing the peace. I looked at the notice again. "Yeah, I got one. $500. This is insane. What are we supposed to do? Let our driveways become impassable?" "I maintain the ski trails," I said slowly. "She's fining me for grooming the trails that everyone in this community uses." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You're kidding." "Nope. Says right here, operation of loud machinery before 7 a.m. But you've been doing this for years." Everyone loves those trails. Apparently not everyone. After I hung up with Tom, I called the HOA office. A woman named Deborah answered, her voice cheerful and completely unhelpful. "Yes, Mr. Jamison, I see your file here. You were issued a citation for violation of quiet hours." "I'm grooming the community ski trails," I explained, keeping my voice level. "I've been doing this for 8 years without complaint." "Well, the rules have always been in place, sir. Just because they weren't enforced before doesn't mean they don't exist." "Can I speak to Patricia, Mrs. Hendricks is very busy. You can submit a written appeal to be heard at next month's HOA meeting." "Next month? That's 3 weeks away." "Yes, sir, the meetings are monthly. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" I hung up without answering. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, the trails would be a mess if I stopped grooming them, but I wasn't about to rack up $1,000 fines every other day. That evening, I posted in our community Facebook group. The response was immediate and overwhelming. "Lucas, please don't stop grooming. We love the trails." Wrote Jennifer Martin, a mother of 3. "This is ridiculous." "Patricia is on a power trip," commented Mike Stevens, who I often saw skiing with his golden retriever. "I saw her out there last week. She uses those trails constantly," added Sarah Chen, but there were other comments too. A few residents I didn't recognize personally seemed to support Patricia's stance. "Rules are rules. No one should be above them," wrote someone named Douglas McPherson. "I shouldn't have to hear snowmobiles at 5 in the morning," agreed a Sandra Williams. The next morning I slept in until 7. It felt wrong. By the time I finished breakfast and looked out at the trails, they were already getting choppy from the previous day's skiers. Without regular grooming, ski trails deteriorated quickly. Every skier who went over them pushed the snow around, creating ruts and uneven patches. My phone started ringing around 9. "Lucas, are you running late?" "The trails look rough this morning," Tom said. "I'm not grooming them anymore. Can't afford $1,000 fines." "You're serious?" "Dead serious. She wants quiet until 7 a.m. She gets quiet until 7 a.m. And by then, there's no point in grooming because people are already using the trails. The thing about grooming ski trails is that timing matters. You need to do it when the snow is cold and firm, when there's no one on the trails yet. Early morning is ideal. By 7 a.m., the early bird skiers were already out, and you couldn't run a groomer over trails people were actively using. Plus, as the day warmed up, the snow became harder to work with. 2 days passed. Then 3. The Facebook group exploded with complaints. "What happened to the trails? They're terrible. Did Lucas stop grooming?" Someone said he got fined by the HOA. On the 4th day, Patricia herself posted, "The trails are maintained by volunteers, and we appreciate everyone's efforts. However, all residents must follow community guidelines. Trail maintenance can occur during appropriate hours." I replied publicly, "Trail grooming must be done early morning when snow is firm and trails are empty. The HOA fine schedule makes it financially impossible for me to continue this volunteer work. I'm sorry to everyone who enjoyed the trails." The backlash against Patricia was swift. "You use those trails every week. This is hypocritical. Call an emergency HOA meeting." I stayed out of it after my one comment. I had said my piece. Now I focused on my actual job as a freelance software developer and watched the drama unfold from the sidelines. A week after the fine, Patricia showed up at my door. It was 2 in the afternoon, and I was in the middle of debugging a particularly annoying piece of code. I almost didn't answer, but she rang the doorbell 3 times in rapid succession. "Lucas, we need to talk," she said when I opened the door. She was dressed in what I had come to think of as her HOA uniform, a crisp pantsuit with a designer scarf, her blonde hair styled perfectly despite the winter wind. "About what?" "The trails. They're in terrible condition." I leaned against the door frame. "Yes, they are. You need to groom them." "I need to follow HOA regulations. You were very clear about the quiet hours rule," her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't be difficult. You know what I meant." "Actually, I don't." "You fined me $500 for doing exactly what I had been doing for 8 years. The fine schedule says continued violations will cost me $1,000 each time. I can't afford that for volunteer work. You're being childish. I'm following the rules. Isn't that what you wanted?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "Look, some new residents complained about the noise. I had to respond, but you don't actually have to stop grooming. So you want me to keep breaking the rules and just hope you don't fine me again?" "I'm saying we can work something out. Put it in writing. Give me a permit or exception or whatever that allows me to groom the trails during the necessary hours without fines. The HOA board would have to approve that, then call a meeting. The next meeting isn't until March 10th. Then I guess the trails stay rough until March 10th. Patricia's professional mask slipped. "You're doing this to spite me." "I'm following the community guidelines you enforced. If you want the trails groomed, change the guidelines. Until then, I'm not risking more fines." She turned and walked away without another word, her heels clicking on my porch steps. That evening, Tom came over with beer and pizza. We sat in my living room, watching the snow fall outside. "You know she's going to make your life hell now," he said. "She already fined me $500. "How much worse can it get?" Tom gave me a look. "Don't tempt fate, man." He was right to warn me. The next week, I received another notice from the HOA. This one cited me for improper snow removal, apparently. The way I had piled snow at the end of my driveway was blocking sight lines and creating a hazard. Fine. $250. I went out and looked at my driveway. The snow pile was exactly where it had been all winter, exactly where everyone else in the neighborhood put their snow piles. I walked down the street and took photos of every single driveway. At least 15 properties had similar or worse snow pile placements. I documented everything and submitted an appeal, attaching all the photos and noting that I was being selectively targeted. The response came back in 2 days. Appeal denied. Other properties will be inspected and violations issued as appropriate. Sure enough, over the next week, several other residents received similar fines. The Facebook group turned into a war zone. Patricia is out of control. I've had my snow piled there for 10 years. This is harassment. A petition started circulating to recall Patricia from the HOA board. It needed signatures from 30% of homeowners to trigger a recall vote. Within 5 days, it had 40%. I signed it, but I stayed out of the organizing. I didn't want to be seen as leading some kind of rebellion. I just wanted to groom ski trails without being fined into bankruptcy. The emergency meeting was scheduled for February 22nd. I marked it on my calendar but didn't expect much. HOA politics tended to move slowly, and Patricia had allies on the board. In the meantime, the trails continued to deteriorate. What had once been smooth, beautiful cross-country ski tracks now looked like a mogul field. The Facebook posts about them became more desperate. Is there anyone else who can groom the trails? Several people tried. Tom took his snowmobile out one Saturday, but he didn't have a groomer attachment, just the snowmobile itself, which packed down some of the snow but didn't create proper ski tracks. Another neighbor, Bill Hudson, tried with his ATV and a homemade drag, but it wasn't the same. Proper trail grooming required specific equipment and experience. I had both, sitting unused in my garage. On February 21st, the day before the emergency meeting, I received a certified letter. My stomach dropped when I saw the return address. It was from a law firm in Burlington. Inside was a cease and desist letter. Patricia, acting as HOA president, was demanding I remove several Facebook posts where I had defamed her character and encouraged community discord. The letter cited specific posts where I had explained why I stopped grooming the trails and where I had pointed out the selective enforcement of rules. I read through it twice, then called my cousin Derek, who was a lawyer in Boston. "Can she do this?" I asked after explaining the situation. "Send me the letter and all the Facebook posts in question," Derek said. "But generally speaking, truth is an absolute defense against defamation. If you stated facts accurately, you're protected." Everything I said was factual. I got fined, I stopped grooming, she uses the trails. "Then you're probably fine. This sounds like a slap-suit strategic lawsuit against public participation. Basically, she's trying to intimidate you into silence. Vermont has anti-slap statutes. If she actually sues you and loses, she might have to pay your legal fees. That's comforting. Send me everything. I'll look it over and send her firm a response. No charge, family rate. Thanks, Derek. No problem. Also, this HOA president sounds like a piece of work. You have no idea." The emergency meeting was held in the community clubhouse at 7 p.m. The room was packed. Our HOA had about 250 homes, and I estimated at least 100 people showed up, which was unheard of for an HOA meeting. Patricia sat at the front table with the other 4 board members. George Hendricks, her husband, naturally, Susan Palmer, Raymond Ortiz, and Margaret Cho. Only Margaret looked uncomfortable with the situation. Patricia called the meeting to order with a gavel. Due to the petition filed by residents, we are here to address concerns about HOA enforcement policies and board leadership. Who would like to speak first? Hands shot up across the room. Patricia pointed to a middle-aged woman in the front row who I recognized as Sandra Williams, one of the people who had initially supported the quiet hours enforcement. I signed the petition because I've now received 2 fines myself, Sandra said. I supported the noise ordinance initially, but the snow removal fine I got was ridiculous. My snow pile is smaller than most on my street. The regulations clearly state, Patricia began. Let her finish, Tom called from the back. Patricia's jaw tightened, but she nodded for Sandra to continue. I think the enforcement has become vindictive and selective. I think the board, specifically the president, is using fines to punish people who disagree with her. The room erupted in applause. Patricia hammered the gavel. Order. Everyone will have a chance to speak. For the next hour, resident after resident stood up to complain. Some talked about the trails. Others discussed various fines they felt were unfair. A few people defended Patricia, mostly older residents who lived on the far side of the development, away from the trail system and most of the noise issues. When it was my turn, I stood up and kept it simple. I groomed the trails for 8 years as a volunteer. I spent my own money on equipment, fuel, and maintenance. I did it because I love skiing and wanted to contribute to the community. When I was fined for this volunteer work, I stopped. Not out of spite, but because I can't afford $1,000 fines every other day. If the HOA wants maintained trails, they need to either hire someone to do it during acceptable hours, find another volunteer willing to pay the fines, or grant an exception to the quiet hours rule for trail maintenance. That's it. I sat down to more applause. Patricia waited for the room to quiet. Mr. Jamison, the board appreciates your years of volunteer work. However, rules exist for a reason. Several residents complained about early morning noise. Who? Someone shouted. HOA complaints are confidential. That's convenient, Tom muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Patricia ignored him. The board cannot simply grant exceptions whenever someone finds a rule inconvenient. That would undermine the entire purpose of having guidelines. Margaret Cho leaned forward. May I speak, Madam President? Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. I think there's a reasonable compromise here, Margaret said. Trail grooming is a unique situation. It provides value to the entire community, and it has timing requirements that conflict with our quiet hours. We could create a specific exception for trail maintenance activities, limited to certain days per week, perhaps 3 mornings weekly instead of every other day. That would reduce the noise impact while still maintaining the trails. It was a reasonable proposal. Too reasonable for Patricia to accept. The board would need to review and vote on any policy changes, Patricia said. That's not something we can decide tonight. Why not? Asked Raymond Ortiz, another board member. We're all here. We have a quorum. I move that we vote on creating a trail maintenance exception to the quiet hours rule. I second, Margaret said immediately. Patricia looked trapped. Very well. Board members, we will vote on creating an exception to Section 4.2b for trail grooming activities, limited to 3 mornings per week, between the hours of 5 and 7 a.m. All in favor? Margaret and Raymond raised their hands. Susan Palmer hesitated, then raised hers as well. Opposed? Patricia and George raised their hands. The motion passes 3-2, Margaret announced. The room erupted in cheers. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Finally, some sanity, but Patricia wasn't done. The motion passes, but implementation requires drafting amended guidelines, which must be circulated to all homeowners for review before taking effect. That process takes a minimum of 30 days per our bylaws. The cheers died down. 30 days, Tom said. That's practically the end of ski season. Rules are rules, Patricia said, echoing my words back to me with a tight smile. Margaret looked frustrated. Patricia, we could expedite, the bylaws are clear. Any amended guidelines must be circulated for 30 days before implementation. Unless you'd like to propose we ignore our own bylaws. She had us there. The bylaws did require a review period for changes. As the meeting broke up, several people came over to thank me for maintaining the trails over the years and to apologize that it had come to this. Margaret Cho approached me as I was putting on my coat. I'm sorry about the 30-day thing, she said. She's technically right about the bylaws. I know, it's fine. No, it's not. She's been impossible lately. I think the petition rattled her, and now she's doubling down instead of compromising. Why does she care so much about the noise complaints? She uses the trails herself. Margaret glanced around and lowered her voice. Between you and me. Her husband George has been working from home since his company downsized. He has to be on calls with West Coast clients early in the morning. I think the snowmobile noise bothers him, and she went nuclear about it without thinking about the consequences. That made a certain amount of sense. George Hendricks worked in tech sales and always seemed stressed on the rare occasions I saw him around the neighborhood. So this whole thing is because her husband is cranky during morning calls. I can't prove it, but that's my theory. She won't admit it, of course. That would make the enforcement look even more arbitrary. I drove home feeling both relieved and frustrated. Relieved that there would eventually be an exception for trail grooming, frustrated that it wouldn't help this season. March 24th would be the earliest the new rules could take effect, and by then, we'd be lucky to have much snow left. The next morning, I slept in again. The trails could wait 30 days, apparently, but Patricia wasn't done escalating things. 3 days after the meeting, I received another certified letter. This one wasn't from a law firm. It was from the HOA directly, citing me for violation of community standards because my garage door had peeling paint. I went out and examined my garage door. Yes, there was some paint peeling near the bottom corner. It had been there for at least 2 years, probably longer. It was minor and cosmetic, but according to the letter, it violated the community standards for property maintenance. Fine, $300. I took photos and looked around the neighborhood again. Dozens of properties had similar or worse issues: peeling paint, faded siding, weathered deck boards. I documented 15 properties within a 3-block radius that had visible maintenance issues. This time, I didn't just appeal to the HOA. I called Derek again. She's harassing you, he said after I explained the latest fine. This is getting into legal harassment territory, especially combined with the cease and desist letter. What can I do? Document everything. Every fine, every interaction, every piece of evidence showing selective enforcement. If she keeps this up, we might have grounds for a harassment claim or even a civil rights complaint if we can show she's trying to deprive you of your property rights. That seems extreme. So is fining someone into financial hardship over volunteer work. Look, I'll send a letter to the HOA on firm letterhead, not as your cousin but as your attorney. Sometimes that's enough to make people back off. Do it. Derek's letter went out the next day. It was professional but firm, outlining the pattern of selective enforcement and noting that continued targeting of me specifically would be viewed as harassment and could result in legal action. For about a week, things were quiet. I thought maybe Patricia had gotten the message. Then the Facebook group exploded again. But this time it wasn't about ski trails. Someone had broken into the community clubhouse and vandalized it. Spray paint covered the walls with messages like, "Patricia is a tyrant," and "Recall the board." Windows were broken, and the meeting table had been flipped over. The community was in shock. Whatever disagreements people had with the HOA, this crossed a line. Criminal vandalism wasn't the answer. Patricia sent an emergency email to all residents, announcing that the clubhouse would be closed until repairs were made and that the sheriff's department was investigating. She also suspended all HOA meetings indefinitely, citing security concerns. "This is clearly the work of anti-HOA extremists within our community," she wrote. "Those who have been stirring up discord and encouraging disrespect for community leadership have created an environment where this kind of violence becomes possible." I read that paragraph 3 times, my blood pressure rising. She was blaming the vandalism on people who had criticized her leadership. She was blaming people like me. Sure enough, the next day, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. "Lucas Jamison," he asked. "That's me. I'm Deputy Carson. I'm investigating the vandalism at the Mountainside Estates clubhouse. Do you have a few minutes to answer some questions?" "Of course. Come in." We sat in my living room and Deputy Carson pulled out a notebook. "You've had some disputes with the HOA recently?" he asked. "I've received several fines I believe are unfair, yes. There was an issue with trail grooming and quiet hours." "The ski trails." "Right. I used to maintain them, got fined, stopped maintaining them." "And you attended the emergency meeting on February 22nd. "Yes, along with about 100 other residents." "Can you account for your whereabouts on the night of February 25th between midnight and 4 a.m.? I thought back. "I was here asleep. I live alone, so I can't prove it, but I have security cameras on my front and back doors that would show I didn't leave." "Can I see that footage?" "Absolutely." I pulled up the footage on my computer. It clearly showed no one entering or leaving my house during the relevant time frame. My car sat undisturbed in the driveway. Deputy Carson made notes. "You have any idea who might have done this?" "No clue." "Look, I think Patricia Hendricks has been overstepping as HOA president, and a lot of people are frustrated with her, but I don't know anyone who would vandalize property over it. That's crazy." "You think Mrs. Hendricks has been overstepping?" "I think she's been selectively enforcing rules to target people who disagree with her. But disagreeing with someone's leadership style doesn't make me a vandal." "Fair enough. Thanks for your cooperation, Mr. Jamison." After he left, I called Tom. "Did you get a visit from the sheriff?" I asked. "Yeah, about an hour ago. This is nuts. You think Patricia actually believes we had something to do with it?" "I think she's happy to imply it, whether she believes it or not." Over the next few days, the sheriff interviewed dozens of residents. The investigation turned up no leads. Whoever vandalized the clubhouse had been careful: no fingerprints, no witnesses, nothing on the community's security cameras, which apparently hadn't been working that night. That last detail struck me as odd, but I didn't voice my suspicions. I had no proof of anything. March arrived with warmer temperatures and the knowledge that ski season was coming to an end. The trails were barely usable now, rutted and icy. Most people had given up on them. On March 8th, I received another certified letter. This one informed me that my appeal of the garage door paint violation had been denied, and that the $300 fine remained in effect. Additionally, I was being fined another $500 for failure to remedy the violation within the required time frame. $800 for peeling paint that would take me an afternoon, and $50 in paint to fix. I called Derek immediately. "They're trying to force you out," he said. "Financially squeeze you until you sell and leave." "Can they do that?" "Not legally, no." but they can make your life miserable and expensive. We need to fight back harder. I'm going to file a harassment claim in civil court. We'll ask for an injunction preventing the HOA from issuing you further fines until a judge can review the selective enforcement pattern. How much will that cost? With the family discount, a couple grand, maybe less. But if we win, the HOA pays your legal fees. And if we lose, then you're out the legal fees and still dealing with the fines. But Lucas, I really think we can win this. The pattern is clear. Do it. The civil complaint was filed on March 12th. Derek submitted all the documentation, every fine I had received, photos showing other properties with similar violations that weren't fined, the timeline showing how fines increased after I stopped grooming trails, and Patricia's cease and desist letter. The HOA was served on March 14th. Patricia's response was to send another email to all residents, announcing that I was suing the HOA and that my legal action would cost the community thousands in legal defense fees. Mr. Jamison apparently believes he is above the rules that govern our community, she wrote. His selfish litigation will drain HOA funds that should be used for community improvements. Every resident will ultimately pay the price for his entitlement. The Facebook group went ballistic. Patricia, you're the one who caused this by fining him in the first place. This is victim blaming at its finest. How about the HOA just stops harassing Lucas? But there were also comments supporting Patricia, mostly from her allies. If Lucas doesn't like the rules, he should move. HOA boards have the right to enforce community standards. People who sue the HOA are parasites. The community was completely divided now. Neighbors who had been friendly for years weren't speaking to each other. The vandalism at the clubhouse had made everyone suspicious and paranoid. It was ugly. On March 20th, something changed. I got a call from Margaret Cho. Lucas, can you meet me for coffee? Somewhere outside the neighborhood. Sure, when? Today, if possible. It's important. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Stowe. Margaret looked nervous, glancing around before she sat down. What's going on? I asked. I'm resigning from the HOA board, she said. I can't be part of what Patricia is doing anymore, but before I leave, I wanted you to know something. Okay, she pulled out her phone and showed me an email thread. The quiet hours complaints Patricia cited as the reason for your fine. There were only 2 of them, one from George Hendricks, her husband, one from Sandra Williams, who has since apologized and admitted she was wrong. I stared at the emails. 2 complaints. She made it sound like there were dozens, because there weren't dozens. There were 2, and one of them was her own husband. She issued the fine based on that. Can I have copies of these? I already sent them to your cousin's law firm. I'm going to testify about the selective enforcement if it comes to that. I've been documenting everything since the February meeting. Why are you doing this? Because it's wrong. I joined the HOA board to help our community, not to watch Patricia turn it into her personal fiefdom. She's been getting worse for months, but the trail thing was where she really went off the rails. And I think there's something else you should know. What? Margaret hesitated. I don't have proof, but I think Patricia vandalized the clubhouse herself. I set down my coffee. That's a serious accusation. I know. That's why I haven't told the police. I can't prove it. But the cameras stopped working the day before, and Patricia is the only board member with access to the system to disable them. The vandalism happened right after she started losing control of the board and the community. The messages spray painted on the walls there too perfect, too on the nose, like someone was trying to make the anti-HOA people look bad. You really think she'd do that? I think she's desperate. The recall petition scared her. Your lawsuit scared her. She's watching her power slip away, and people do desperate things when they're cornered. After Margaret left, I sat in the coffee shop for a long time thinking. If Patricia had vandalized her own clubhouse, that was insurance fraud at minimum, possibly other crimes. But without proof, there was nothing I could do with the information. I forwarded Margaret's suspicions to Derek, who agreed we couldn't act on them without evidence. The preliminary hearing for my harassment case was scheduled for April 3rd. Spring was definitely here now, the last patches of snow melting away. The ski trails were gone for the season, just muddy paths through the woods. 2 days before the hearing, Deputy Carson came back to my door. "Mr. Jamison, I wanted to update you on the vandalism investigation." "Did you find who did it?" "We did. Patricia Hendricks confessed this morning." I stood there in shock. She confessed. Her husband George came forward yesterday with evidence. Apparently, he found the spray paint cans hidden in their garage and confronted her. She broke down and admitted it. She's being charged with criminal mischief, filing a false police report, and insurance fraud for claiming the damage on the HOA's insurance policy. I don't know what to say. You were right to push back against her. The investigation into the vandalism led us to look at HOA records, and we found a lot of irregularities, financial discrepancies, potential embezzlement. The Vermont Attorney General's office is now involved. This is going to be a big case. After Deputy Carson left, I called Derek. "Turn on the local news," I said. The story was already breaking. Patricia Hendricks, HOA president, arrested for vandalism and fraud. The news anchors looked almost amused as they reported on the suburban drama that had spiraled into criminal charges. The Facebook group was in complete chaos. "I can't believe it." I knew something was off. "What happens to the HOA now?" George Hendricks posted a public apology that evening. "I am deeply sorry for my role in enabling my wife's behavior. I was the source of the noise complaint that started this entire situation. And I pressured Patricia to enforce the quiet hours rule without considering the impact on the community. When I discovered evidence that she had vandalized the clubhouse to discredit her critics, I knew I had to come forward. I have resigned from the HOA board, effective immediately, and my family will be moving out of Mountainside Estates. I hope the community can heal from the damage we caused." The preliminary hearing for my case was canceled. The HOA's new interim president, Raymond Ortiz, called me personally. "Mr. Jamison, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize for everything that happened. We're dropping all fines against you and anyone else who Patricia targeted. We're also implementing the trail grooming exception, immediately no 30-day waiting period needed. If you're willing to resume maintaining the trails next season, the HOA will cover your fuel costs and contribute toward equipment maintenance." "I appreciate that, Raymond." "We're also implementing new oversight procedures to prevent any board member from having this much unilateral power again. This should never have happened." Over the following weeks, the full extent of Patricia's misconduct came out. She had been embezzling HOA funds for over a year, small amounts that added up to about $30,000. The money had gone to pay off credit card debt that George didn't know about. The fines she had been issuing so aggressively. A portion of those were going into her personal account through a bookkeeping scheme. The Vermont Attorney General charged her with embezzlement, fraud, criminal mischief, and several other counts. George wasn't charged with anything. He cooperated fully with investigators once he discovered what Patricia had done. The community slowly began to heal. The recall petition was withdrawn since Patricia was obviously no longer president. An election was held in May, and the new board included several people who had been vocal critics of the old regime, including Tom Richardson. I spent a weekend in early May fixing up my garage door, not because anyone was making me, but because spring was a good time for that kind of project. The paint looked nice when I was done. Derek closed out my harassment case with all legal fees paid by the HOA's insurance company. The insurance company, in turn, was going after Patricia to recover what they had paid out on the fraudulent clubhouse damage claim. In late June, Patricia pled guilty to multiple charges as part of a plea agreement. She received 3 years in prison, suspended to 18 months if she completed her sentence without incident, plus 5 years of probation and full restitution of the embezzled funds. George divorced her while she was awaiting sentencing. I ran into Margaret Cho at the grocery store in August. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Good. Better now that everything is settled. Are you going to groom the trails again this winter?" "Yeah, I think so. I do miss it." The community missed it too. We didn't realize how much we relied on you until you were gone. It was a good lesson for everyone, I think. Don't take volunteers for granted, she laughed. True. Hey, the new board wants to create a formal trails committee to support the maintenance work. Interested in being on it? Maybe. Let me think about it. When winter rolled around again, I was up at 5 in the morning, running my snowmobile and groomer across fresh powder, creating perfect corduroy tracks through the woods. The sound of the machine echoed through the cold air, and this time, no one complained. Tom joined me sometimes, just for company, following behind on his snowmobile. We'd finish grooming as the sun came up, painting the snow pink and orange, then head back for coffee. The trails were beautiful again. Families used them every weekend. The local ski club scheduled regular events. People greeted me with waves and thanks when they saw me out there. One morning in January, I saw a familiar figure skiing toward me. For a second, I thought it might be Patricia, and my stomach clenched. But it was just Sandra Williams, the woman who had made the original noise complaint. She stopped when she reached me. "Lucas, I wanted to apologize again. I feel terrible about my role in starting all of this." "It's okay, Sandra. You didn't know what Patricia was really up to." "Still, I should have thought about the bigger picture. These trails are wonderful, and you've done such an amazing job maintaining them. Thank you." "You're welcome. Enjoy the skiing." She skied off, and I watched her disappear into the trees, following the groomed tracks deeper into the woods. I thought about everything that had happened: the fines, the harassment, the community division, Patricia's arrest, all of it. It had been exhausting and expensive and frustrating. But in a weird way, it had made the community stronger. People paid more attention to HOA governance now. They showed up to meetings. They didn't take their volunteers for granted. And the trails were perfect. I fired up the snowmobile and headed for the North Loop, which needed a second pass after yesterday's heavy snowfall. The machine hummed smoothly, the groomer behind me cutting clean tracks in the pristine snow. Early morning light filtered through the pine trees, and my breath made clouds in the freezing air. This was why I did it. Not for recognition or thanks, although those were nice. I did it because these woods in winter were magical, and maintaining the trails was my way of sharing that magic with my neighbors. Patricia had tried to take that away with her petty fines and power games, but she had failed. The community had my back, even when they didn't realize it at first. Once people understood what was really happening, they had stood up and demanded better. That meant something. I finished the North Loop and circled back toward home, checking my watch. 6:45, right on schedule. By 7, early bird skiers would start arriving, and they'd find perfectly groomed trails waiting for them. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Trails look great. Coffee at your place. Come on over," I replied. I parked the snowmobile in my garage, next to the freshly painted door, and went inside to start coffee. Through my window, I could see the trail system stretching into the distance, white ribbons winding through green forest. Tom arrived a few minutes later, stomping snow off his boots on my porch. "Beautiful morning," he said. "The best kind." We sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and watching more skiers head out onto the trails. A family with young kids, an older couple moving slowly but steadily. A group of teenagers racing each other. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Tom asked. "What?" Patricia thought she could control everyone through fear and fines, but all she did was show us how much we needed to work together. "The new board is better. The community is more engaged. And you're out there every morning doing what you love without looking over your shoulder for citations." I could have done without the 18 months of drama to get here. True, but sometimes you don't know how strong you are until you have to stand up to a bully. I raised my coffee mug. Here's to standing up to bullies, and to perfectly groomed ski trails. We clinked mugs and drank. Later that day, I got an email from Raymond Ortiz with the subject line, "Trail Maintenance Appreciation." Inside was a formal letter from the HOA board, thanking me for my years of volunteer service and announcing that they were naming the main trail loop, Jamison's Run, in my honor. A small ceremony would be held in February to unveil the sign. I read the email twice, unexpected emotion welling up. After everything that had happened, this felt like vindication. More than that, it felt like recognition that what I had been doing mattered. I called my sister Emily in Seattle that evening to tell her about everything that had happened. "Let me get this straight," she said. "Your HOA president fined you for maintaining ski trails, vandalized her own clubhouse, embezzled $30,000 and is now in prison. Suspended sentence, but yeah, basically. And they're naming a trail after you, apparently. That's the most Vermont thing I've ever heard." I laughed. "Probably true. I'm proud of you, little brother. You could have just paid the fine and let it go, but you stood your ground. I don't think I could have lived with myself if I had just rolled over. That's why I'm proud of you." The ceremony in February was small but nice. About 50 people showed up, despite the cold. Raymond gave a speech about community volunteers and the importance of standing up for what's right. They unveiled a wooden sign at the trailhead, "Jamison's Run in appreciation of Lucas Jamison's dedication to our community." Tom had brought a flask of whiskey, which we passed around after the ceremony, toasting the trails and new beginnings. As people dispersed to actually ski the newly named trail, Margaret Cho approached me. "This is nice," she said. "You deserve this recognition. Thanks for standing up when it mattered. Your testimony about the complaint emails made a huge difference. Someone had to speak up. I just wish I had done it sooner. You did it when it counted. That's what matters." She smiled and headed off to join her family on the trails. I stood there for a while, looking at the sign with my name on it, thinking about the journey that had led here. Last year at this time, I had been defending myself against bogus fines, watching my community tear itself apart, and wondering if I would ever groom these trails again. Now I was here, watching families ski past on perfectly groomed tracks, with a sign bearing my name and the gratitude of my neighbors. Patricia was gone, the HOA was reformed, and the trails were better than ever. Sometimes standing up for yourself leads to unexpected places. I grabbed my skis from the car and headed on to Jamison's Run, enjoying the smooth glide of the freshly groomed snow. The afternoon sun was bright on the white landscape, and the air smelled like pine and winter. Behind me, I could hear the laughter of the kids trying to keep up with their parents, the swoosh of skis on snow, the occasional call of "on your left," as faster skiers passed slower ones. This was community. Real community. not enforced through threats and fines, but built through shared experiences and mutual respect. It had taken a crisis to remind us all of that, but we had learned the lesson. I skied the entire loop, enjoying every turn and glide. When I reached the trailhead again, Tom was waiting. "How does it feel to ski on your own named trail?" he asked. "Pretty good, actually. Pretty damn good. Want to grab dinner? My treat. We're celebrating. Sounds perfect." We drove into town, past the mountains and forests that made Vermont home, past the neighborhoods and communities that made it worth fighting for. The restaurant was warm and crowded, full of locals escaping the winter cold. We ordered burgers and beer, and Tom told stories about the latest HOA meeting, which was apparently boring in the best possible way. No drama, no fines, just normal community business. "That's what it should be," I said. "Boring and functional. Amen to that." We ate and talked and laughed, and later, driving home through the snowy darkness, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The nightmare with Patricia and the HOA was over. Justice had been served. The community had healed. The trails were maintained and appreciated. Tomorrow morning I would be up at 5 again, grooming the trails before dawn. The day after that I would do it again. And the day after that. Not because anyone was making me, not because I was afraid of fines, but because it was what I loved to do. That was freedom. That was community. That was home. I pulled into my driveway, the motion sensor light clicking on, illuminating the freshly painted garage door and the snowmobile waiting in its bay. Everything was exactly as it should be. Inside, I made a final cup of coffee and checked the weather forecast. More snow tomorrow, which meant good grooming conditions. I set my alarm for 4:30 and went to bed, ready for another day on the trails. The story of Patricia Hendricks and the HOA disaster became local legend. People still talked about it at community gatherings, shaking their heads in disbelief. The newspaper had run several articles about the scandal, and the Vermont Attorney General's office used our HOA as a case study in how community organizations could go wrong without proper oversight. But for me, it was just the past now. The present was much better. The present was perfect groomed trails and grateful neighbors and a community that finally understood what really mattered. I fell asleep thinking about tomorrow's grooming route and dreaming of fresh powder and smooth tracks stretching through the winter woods. The alarm went off at 4:30, and I rose without hesitation, ready to maintain the trails that had caused so much trouble and now brought so much joy. Outside, the stars were still visible, and the cold air bit at my face as I loaded up the snowmobile. The engine started with a familiar roar, and I headed out into the darkness, headlight cutting through the night, creating beauty in my wake. This was my contribution. This was my community. This was my home. And no one, not Patricia or any other petty tyrant, could take that away from me ever again.